Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here, and we have the Ayato Math Guide 2 ready. And this time around we are looking at Primordial Jade as mentioned in the Math Guide 1. So I'm not really going to go through in detail about Primordial Jade, but you can see from the stats here, it's very simple and straightforward. It helps with your HP skilling, or rather the partial HP skilling that Ayato has. Okay, so stats-wise everything, the concept is the same. These are the items that we'll go through today. Important notes and assumptions. PJC versus Haran in terms of solo damage. ATK Sands versus HP Sands for PJC. Comparison against Itto solo DPS, to keep in line with the comparison that we have done in Math Guide 1. A quick side note. A TLDR of what we have covered and what's next in the Ayato video series or map series. Let me make a series. Alright, so in terms of the important notes and assumptions, these are all the same. Other than this should be second, but I think you know what I mean. Everything else is the same, but I wanted to show it here so that it's clear. I'm not going to go through this, you can read them if you have not already watched Math Guide 1. But if you have not watched Math Guide 1, I would definitely recommend you to watch Math Guide 1 first, so you can get a better basis of what we are talking about here. So let's look at the damage figure itself. PJC versus Haran. Haran is his signature weapon. I mean, obviously it's longer than that, than her full name, but I'm just going to take the first name, first way in the name. So these are the damage figures in 6 seconds. This is the DPS, and this is obviously using Ayato as a first main, because second main has a lot of issues, and or rather a couple of issues, and I'll talk about those later. I'll do a recap on those later. And here we have the Haran first main DPS figures. If you force the first main on the Haran weapon, because the Haran weapon is kinda designed to be second main. And these are the percentage figures. You see that there are no negative figures. What this means is that PJC is better than Haran. If you see negative figures, then Haran is better. So first off, why is this the case? We are only comparing first main DPS figures here, because that itself is the benefit of PJC, Primordial Jade, that you don't have to use Ayato as the same second main DPS. So let's recap on the two issues with Ayato being the second main DPS. A. You use him as a second main and choose not to buff the first main, which is very inefficient. Or you use him as a second main, but buffs all go to the first main, which feels really bad for Ayato, right? In the end, you're using a character that your spiffy new character that you spend effort building, etc., and you're not even buffing him. Now, despite the issues above, and the main thing is because the main reason for this too is that there are no buffs right now that can last for both mains, other than Sarah applying two separate buffs. But if you want to use it as second main DPS for some reason, obviously Haran will still be better. Just look at the stats of Haran, you know. Okay? But I don't like him being the second main DPS of all because of these issues here. So one last thing before we look at the comparison, I wanted to address this specifically. I actually thought of this in Math Guide 1, but I thought it was very bad, so I did not even mention it in Math Guide 1. But I started seeing it in comments, so I thought it's good that I address it in my videos. So doing 1 to 2 normal attacks per character rotation is not good. Okay? Because especially if you think this is a viable alternative or better alternative than doing 5 normal attacks in a row. Why? Really think about the normal attack animation of most characters. Typically, the faster and multiple hits NA come from the second or fourth NA. Usually it's somewhere on the third. There are cases where it's the second, there are cases where it's the fourth. And not to mention, your first NA is usually the slowest, because as you do your NA string, typically your second and fourth are faster. Okay, putting aside multiple hits, right? The second and fourth hits are usually faster in your string. Obviously, there are some that are slower even than the first, but you get what I'm talking about here. So if you split the normal attacks across your other characters while doing rotation, and what does this mean? This means that let's say if you needed to use your Bennett to begin with, you try to slot in some normal attacks in between, or maybe like your first move is normal attack, then depending on your preference you do either the burst or the elemental skill first, and then you end off with one more normal attack. I can tell you, if you do that, if you add on the attack animation time across all these characters, it will likely add up to more than 3 seconds for the 5 normal attacks, because of all these reasons I've mentioned here. So I honestly don't recommend this. I know it feels faster when you're doing it per character rotation, but it's actually not. Okay? Now, let's get it out of the way. Now, let's look at the actual comparison now. PJC is better than Haran in all scenarios for first main DPS. Not surprising, since Haran's terrible design requires it to be the second main, while the setup time for 5 normal attacks from forcing the first main on Haran is extremely detrimental to his DPS. It's extremely detrimental, and that's the reason why Primordial Jade Cutter performs like this. Look at all the, okay, ignore these 2 rows, these 2 are for burst. Just look at this. We are talking about 25 to 45% better than Haran for his E. That is how bad the setup time for Haran's effect is. Because remember what I said, right? If you use a second main DPS without that so-called loss in DPS from the setup time, Haran is actually better. But now, with that factored in, you'll see that Primordial Jade Cutter is now 25 to 48% better, which is crazy. At R1, most of it is 40 plus. This is attack, this is HP. So, it's mind-blowing how much better PJC is than Haran if you are going first main DPS, which is what I personally would prefer as well. Because second main has all those issues that I've mentioned, which is very, very bad. Because you lose buff either on either of the main DPS, which is very, very bad for your team DPS. Overall team DPS. So for his Q, because all of this is regards to Ayato's E, his elemental skill. If we look at his elemental burst, PJC is better by 10 to 31%. So if you want to focus on sub DPS, mainly his Q, PJC is better than Haran, which is quite a no-brainer, right? Because Haran focuses on E. All he has is that 12 or 24% elemental damage bonus that buffs the burst. His other E effect doesn't buff the burst as well. So obviously, Jade Cutter is better by 10 to 31%. Okay. Now this looks really overwhelmingly good and in favor of Jade Cutter. But do check out my TLDR session. I'll address it. I'll sum it up. I'll summarize this as well. Okay, now next, Attack Sands versus HP Sands for Primordial Jade Cutter. Since Primordial Jade Cutter helps with your HP scaling, does it make sense to use HP Sands now? If you look at the percentage figures here, the negative percentage implies that HP Sands is better. The positive figure implies that Attack Sands is better. There are now scenarios where HP Sands is better than Attack Sands, since PJC helps with HP scaling. But it's C2 R5 and C3 R5. Not everyone has R5 Jade Cutter, right? But this is assuming well-rolled artifacts. Equally well-rolled artifacts between your Attack Sands and HP Sands. In scenarios where you have a HP Sands that's better than your Attack Sands, with the difference of magnitude being like a perfect versus a average, I'll say that the figures with 1 to 2%, okay, the figures with 1 to 2% will have HP Sands being better, because that 1% will be covered by this difference. And what are those scenarios? Basically, all scenarios with your R5 weapon and C2 R1 and C3 R1. Remember, C2 and C3 helps his HP scaling a lot compared to the rest of the constellations. Okay? So if your attack sense is absolutely horrible, but your HP sense is perfect, because we all know how artifact upgrading luck can happen, right? The RNG. So HP sense will be better even at C0R1. So we are saying, what I'm saying here is that if the difference between your attack sense and HP sense is tremendous, C0R1, this 3% difference, 3% where attack sense is better, can be made up for, and your HP, and it can be worthwhile using a HP sense. But again, it really depends on how your artifact upgrades turn out. Okay, so I hope this information is helpful for you guys. Now let's look at the comparison against Itto solo damage. So we have Itto here, we have the Haran attack as the first min, and PJC attack sense as the first min. So you see this is the percentage figures. For this, there's no change from the first math guide. From math guide 1, we have already established that the Haran attack sense, if you force first min, is 51 to 62%. This is new. This is the PJC figure, and it's 9 to 24%. So basically, Itto is still always better than Ayato, even if you use Jade Cutter as the first min. But it is a huge improvement from Haran, because you are going from 51 to 62% worse off than Itto to 9 to 24% worse off than Itto. So that is better for PJC as the first min. Now as for Haran as the second min, while the percentage figures I shared in Ayato Math Guide 1 is better than the PJC first min, remember that this is solo damage. Okay, this is all solo damage. If you factor in buffs, PJC first min will do better than Haran second min. Because, like I said, there's no way to apply buffs for both mins in the Haran second min comp. So when you compare, right, it's either you compare a PJC buffed versus a Haran without buffs. So no brainer, right? PJC first min with buffs definitely will do better than Haran second min without buffs. Or you compare them with buff, but your other min DPS suffers with no buffs. And that's a huge loss for their DPS, and a huge loss to your overall team DPS. So really, right now the only buff I can think of in-game is Sarah's separate application that allows you to buff both characters, both mins. But again, there's an inherent issue where Sarah's buff only lasts 6 seconds, so you need the other min to be able to utilize this 6 seconds without having too much unbuffed time. And like I said, Raiden is the only one. But I'll talk about Raiden later. It's likely that she cannot trigger Haran's effect. And I already know this when I was doing Math Guide 1, but I was simply stating her duration. Okay, but I'll talk more about that during the side note. Yeah, in fact I can talk about it now because this point is the same as what I've mentioned in Math Guide 1. In case you have not seen Math Guide 1, then this is the reason why I'm comparing against Itto. Okay, let's talk about the Raiden point. I stated Raiden as an example in Ayato Math Guide 1 just to show the limited options that we have in terms of the short stance duration, with Raiden's being the shortest, 7 seconds, as opposed to Sarah's buff of 6 seconds. So that's it. That's the only reason why. So yes, I am aware that it may not work. I have not done the deep dive. So if I do the deep dive, likely the result that I come with is that Raiden's Q likely will not work. If we expect that the reading reads the same as Beido's, and Beido's doesn't work. So I will appreciate your patience in waiting for the Ayato TeamCon video, where I will deep dive into TeamCon options and I'll talk about all the possible characters, etc. that will work for Ayato. I'm trying to focus on solo here so that we don't have too long of a video, and also so that I'm able to churn out more videos for you guys, so that it's not a super long wait for a super long video. Okay, I hope you can appreciate that. Now let's go into the TLDR session since this side note is done. I know it looks long, but no worries, I'll go through it real fast. First off, PJC performs 25 to 48% better than Haran for first main DPS solo E, is elemental skill only, which is a very significant difference, and it allows for smoother rotation as well, right? No condition, no stats, nothing for you to remember, just use the weapon and go. No wasting of time. Most important thing, no wasting of time with 5 unoptimized normal attacks, be it 5 in a row or 1 to 2 per character rotation. Now, another thing, if you think using such normal attacks to justify energy regen is something to acceptable, it's not. It's really bad too, because energy regen for normal attacks are bad to begin with. That's number 1. Number 2, doesn't change the fact that they are still low damage unoptimized normal attacks that affect your overall team DPS. Okay? And in fact, if you're already using low damage unoptimized normal attacks right now to regain energy, or your sub DPS for example, something is wrong with your comm and ER stats, and that requires fixing. Okay? Point number 2, PJC also performs better than Haran by 10 to 31% for his solo queue, which is great if you want to focus on sub DPS. And it's also good even if you're using him as a main DPS, because just because you're using a main DPS doesn't mean that you don't use his Q, right? So this is also a very good point for Project Cutter. Now, I can't be always saying that PJC is better, so I'll just point out where PJC does perform worse than Haran, and that's the second main DPS scenario. But again, second main DPS scenario has these issues since buff can't last for both mains. There's 2 issues, right? Either you basically these 2 issues, what it means that you can only buff one of the main. You have to choose, and both are bad for your overall team DPS and makes Haran worse off. And this difference is even bigger the better your support characters, which is quite understandable, right? Because we are talking about only being able to buff one main if you set him as a second main. So for attack versus HP sense, this is the TLDR. I'll quickly run through it. For equally road sense, HP sense will do better than attack sense for C2R5, C3R5. If your HP sense is better road than your attack sense, normal type of variance per se, HP sense is better for C2R1, C3R1, and C0C6R5 Jade Cutter. If your HP sense is perfect or near perfect while your attack sense are abysmal, or is abysmal, sorry, because it happens, right? Because artifact RNG in terms of both the farming and upgrading is the biggest problem in this game. Well, not the problem, but biggest pain in this game. So if in such a scenario where the degree of or the magnitude of difference is that big, HP sense can be better or is better for C0R1 Jade Cutter. So this is something to bear in mind while you're farming artifacts for him. If you do happen to get a broken HP sense and somehow the upgrading went super perfect, it can be better than attack sense for C0R1. But this degree of change is required, yeah? Or rather, this magnitude of difference, sorry, not degree of change. This magnitude of difference is required for this to be better at C0R1. But for C2, C3, more or less, you can go for HP sense. Even C2, R1, C3, R1, if you have equally rolled, attack sense is better, but it's only 1% better. Now let's talk about future changes that may improve Haran's situation, even if there are no further changes to Haran. Because obviously Haran is still in beta, it can still be changed. But let's say if Hoyoverse decides that they want to keep it the same. What are some other future changes that may improve his signature weapon situation? So 1, new characters that can provide buffs that last long enough for both mains, or easy separate buffs with short duration and short cooldown. Okay. Sarah kinda fits into this, but not entirely. New, or in future, if we get new main DPS characters with a short duration stance and cooldown like Ayato's E, 6 seconds duration, 12 seconds cooldown, and provided that they can trigger Haran's stacks as well, that will improve Haran's situation. But in fact, I'll say you need both of these together. You actually need both of these together in order to really improve this weapon as a second, and playing Ayato as a second main DPS. But honestly, this is very, very, very copium, and definitely not worth pulling his signature weapon for. Right? Why would I want to pull for Haran when I have this kind of like very, very conditional future dependency that we don't even know whether it will happen. Not good. So last TLDR point, hold your horses. Because while PJC is a clear winner here, especially based on all the figures that I've shared and all the conditions and points to take note of, I would advise to wait for more beta changes before pulling on the current PJC weapon beta, because we still have, as of this video, slightly more than a week, about 9 or 10 days. So if Haran is improved, I will update my comparison again, and I really hope that it last can improve. I mean, know that I'm advocate spending more money to benefit Hoyoverse, but it's really about improving the situation for Ayato. So I really hope that it does get improved. And if it doesn't get improved, I will be pulling for PJC, because I don't have PJC as well. That weapon, for some reason, I just don't have it. Okay. So let's talk about the last portion, which is what's coming next. We have completed the PJC for Ayato today, and next will be the new artifact for Ayato and comparison against 4-piece HOD. And then after that, then we'll talk about team coin rotations. Now you'll find let me just share that the reason why I'm pushing the team coin rotations further down the line in the math series is because I'm waiting for more of the changes to come for Ayato. I don't want to do rotations and team comp and have it change, because those changes require a lot of rework on this as opposed to just the weapon and the artifacts. Okay. I'll also do more weapon comparison in future, example Missplitter and the 4-star and the F2P options as well. So as always, let me know in comments if there are any specific math you would like, and I'll see if it can be done. You can also join me over at Twitch here, where I answer almost every question there, and the links in the description as well. Okay, so thanks everyone for watching. I hope this has been helpful to you guys in terms of like attack versus HP Sands, how he fares against Itto, as well as the comparison for PJC versus the Haran weapon. If you like the content, remember the video and click subscribe for more. Bye.